Hi, I am Gurvinder Batra. I am co-founder and CEO, CTO at KiwiTech. My role is really helping the operations team for all the product development we do for our startups, as well as looking at new technology trends, new tech stacks, new areas where KiwiTech should be, focused on to support our startup, portfolio. I kind of work between both our India, New Delhi, where I'm right now, where our operations is, here working with the teams on the ground, as well as traveling to US mostly, where most of our startups are, kind of, also bridging the gap by meeting them in person. Like Mohsen, I'm also grounded, actually happily grounded, I would say, not traveling for past many weeks now. And I'm so glad that, we were lucky enough to get all of our US employees working from home almost 3 weeks back, and all of our India employees as well, 2 weeks back, they're all working from home. We really care for our investors, our customers, and most importantly, our employees as well. We were hoping that there should not be any disruption in work. So I'm happy to say that, we are fully operational and not missing any of our deadlines and everything. So today I'm going to talk about QA, quality for product development, so an area which doesn't get as much importance as the more sexy areas like one of them will be coming up by my colleagues shortly, machine learning. But I learned the power of QA many years back through our first venture, even though that was in content. And one of the areas we worked on was financial publishing, where basically we had close to 45% of SEC filings were happening through our center here in New Delhi at that time. And you can imagine just a change of 1 to 0 and how much of an impact it can have, And we used to measure our quality into 99.9995%. So that's where I learned like how critical it is to make sure that you do things right first time. And that's where when we started KiwiTech, even though this was an IT services, we have always focused on making sure the QA gets a lot of importance. So with that, let me pull up my slides, and hopefully all of you will be able to get a little bit better idea about why QA is so very important. So QA is not about just testing your product once the development is completely done. It's all about testing it while the development is going on. It's in the process. And that's what, agile methodology, which is all about a collaborative approach. And we tend to really tell our startups, many times, initial development sprint, there's not as much testing going on. And a lot of testing happens at the end of the product development, when it can also lead to a lot more rework and, going back and trying to fix things. So from a user perspective, if you see QA, we all, are on various devices and everything, and we see a bug or an error. And for us, it's a bit of a nuisance, right? We see like, okay, this is not something what I was expecting, and we move on, right? But if you think from a company or startup perspective, it could be pretty bad. It could be pretty devastating in terms of, your products and services, as well as, your brand, your reputation, how you're building the whole, revenue base and everything. So it can have a huge impact. So to start with, I have this case study, which a company called Tricentis did. It was done a few years back, more than a few years actually, 2015. But a very interesting study. What they did was basically use certain filters like software glitches, software bugs, so basically they kind of looked at the whole year and kind of recorded all such glitches which happen across various industries and categorize them to see the impact of such software glitches. So I thought I'd share with you guys. It's very interesting. So there were 483 such bugs or glitches recorded in 2015, and 18 recorded deaths because of these software glitches. There were 4.3 billion people which were impacted. 8 million cars were recalled, again, talking across the various verticals. 1,157 flights were grounded because of a glitch in software again. 239 companies were involved in these 483 bugs we talked about. And about 428 billion assets were affected. So you can see, like, it can have a huge impact, based on this. So the whole goal of today's, is understanding QA is how you can avoid this, how we can do better to really not make this happen. So again, talking about significance, I think we are all on our mobile or desktop, laptop devices all the time, and we are getting less and less. Our patience is running out, basically, in terms of whether we see the response time, how long it takes for an app to launch on a mobile, or how much long it gets to what I'm going to do, or from just a website, how poorly it is, from like how it's performing, a latency issue or loading issue, it has a huge impact. You can see these numbers: 74%, 46%, 40%. They're big, like, how us as users expect things to happen. And even 1 second delay, it can have a huge impact. I mean, if you are running an e-commerce company making $100,000 revenue a day, and 1 second delay, page delay, can have a huge impact. I think it's about $200.5 million per year. So it is very critical, how QA comes into picture to really avoid such kind of, issues from your product perspective. So give you just kind of a little bit of history, in terms of how the process has evolved over a period of time. We used to talk about waterfall. It's been around for many years. Some companies still, especially in the enterprise world, still follow it. But as you can see, it had all these areas: the development, the QA or testing, and operation, which is basically DevOps, all three isolated. So the development, that's the reason why basically you will not see the product for 6 months, because that's when the testing starts. So the development team is developing a product based on the requirements they've been handed over. And then the QA testing will come in, they test the product, and then finally it gets deployed, So it was very less of collaboration going on in these areas. Now, what Agile did is really brought development and testing and QA into working together, so basically try and collaborate and work together in terms of, not testing at the end of the product development, but more in parallel. So basically, Agile is about breaking into smaller sprint cycles, 2 to 3 weeks, and you're doing the testing in parallel to the developers developing each of these features, and then testing and providing the feedback. So that way you have less surprises, at the end of it. The DevOps part is still happening at a separate entity, as of right now in the Agile methodology. But as you go forward, that's where as they call it, CI/CD, or continuous integration and continuous delivery, is coming into play, where even the DevOps is becoming part and parcel of it. And this especially plays a role once your product is live. So you have a product which is in the hands of users, and then you are still developing new features. In that case, if in the middle, if you have DevOps as a separate way of integration, it may break issues because you have live users. As you are deploying new features, you want to make sure that it's very tightly integrated from a final testing on the service as well. So that's where we're trying to go, having collaboration in all three areas. So again, why is important? If you do not have, prevent these bugs, you saw the Tricentis case study, it can have a lot of impact. It also has an impact in terms of, how we're doing the development. If you don't do enough QA, it can only add to more technical debt that you're collecting as you go through the development cycle. We talked about user experience. I think that's something I'll keep repeating. The user experience is extremely important, because these are users, they expect certain things they see in your competitor products. So that's very important. And QA really helps to make sure that we get a user experience. And if you have a good product, that's where you can build your brand reputation. And in terms of, how people look at your product, and I think Adam talked about some of the products, all those things come from how all these things are looked at: buggy, user experience. That's what builds your reputation. And then there are certain standards that are already there. People expect it, industry expects it, and QA really helps it to kind of set those bars and then make sure that you hit the ball out of the park every time you do a release. You're making sure you're meeting and beating the or exceeding the industry standard as much as possible. And then cost. If you can manage your bugs or how the process works, whether during the development or at the deployment, it can really help to make your cost down, because every bug means like you have to go back, fix the bug, retest it, and redeploy it, which means additional costs at every stage. If we just a high level and touch based on the QA workflow, how that works. You start with the requirements, because that's what the QA engineer is looking at, because they understand what you're looking from this product perspective, and that's where the focus is. And based on those requirements, they create a test plan. That's what the focus is. How will it test this product? And a lot of products may be straightforward, but sometimes you come across product where it really tests you, like how you're going to go about it. I have one example. We had a product we were building for in the equestrian vertical, where we had a sensor on the horse, and then we had a sensor on the rider, basically. And so we are trying to basically measure the heart rate of both simultaneously in a real-time fashion. And obviously, when we are testing the product, we did not have a horse at QTech. We actually did try to find where horses could be available, but it did work out. Now, when we used to deliver the build to the founders, and they, of course, had the horses, so they were actually testing in the real environment. And we were trying to simulate it by somebody sitting in a car and riding, where somebody's driving and another person is trying to simulate, okay, as if I'm sitting in a horse. And we were finding how we were measuring both the heart rate and the speed was not matching with how the founders were doing it. And for longest period of time, we couldn't figure out how this was missed in a test plan, or what are we missing. And then eventually we figured out that in a test plan, we didn't take into account. We took into account movement, but we didn't take into account a horse movement is both horizontal and vertical. So those are the things which become very, very important in the test planning. You figure out what are the critical areas in this product that you're developing. Is it something special you need to do from a QA perspective? So those things are documented well ahead, so you don't have surprises later on. Now, based on this test plan, then you build the test cases. Test cases are how you will create scenarios, and both from a positive perspective, negative perspective. Say, in the same example, as I said, one sensor is not working, what happens then? Or both sensors are not working, what happens then? Not only when both sensors are working, are you getting the data? So there are different test cases scenarios being developed so that you can capture, how, actually you test it. And this is all being done before you actually get the product in your hand. And then once you get the product, you get features, that's when you start reporting the bugs. You're saying, okay, this is a scenario I use and how this particular feature is failing, and document and screenshots and provide that so that the developer who's fixing it, he can actually take care of it. And then at the end of each sprint cycle, because you're adding new features, you execute the same test cases to make sure you do an integration testing, because you want to make sure that you're testing for features which are being developed today, and it's not breaking something which was developed earlier. And finally, you need to have your environment set up from an overall performance testing perspective, so that once you have deployed the product, how it will work out in the actual field when you have thousands of users coming on the platform. So that's how cycle works. You're doing these various setups, test case writing, and to make sure that you test at every sprint cycle, and then you do your performance integration testing and performance testing to make sure it works as per how to do it. Now, we already talked about the impact. Like the increased automation is very, very important, because some cases it's not feasible humanly to really test each feature every time you touch the code manually. So for instance, like an app we developed where we were basically it's a sports app, and we're taking actual scores coming in and trying to show how the impact in the app. And that has to be automated. Otherwise, manually, you cannot even simulate the scoring and everything. Security, we all know, is super critical. Our personal data, personal information, HIPAA, especially in case of like say healthcare product, we need to make sure that we are making sure that's tested correctly. Predictive analysis really helps, but data that you already have, and use that to basically prevent any issues later on. So that becomes very important. And I think I already talked about the user experience. User experience is utmost importance, like in terms of how we make sure we give a good user experience to everyone. So finally, from a takeaway perspective, I think focus on user experience a lot. So we have built a really world-class UI team here at QTech. Again, coming from a content background, it really helped us to focus on it. And we pay a lot of importance on that. Make sure your test coverage is always 100%. That's how it should be from QA perspective. But start looking at even code, your unit testing, as we call it. That's not normally 100% because the cost is too high. It starts from anywhere from 65, 70% and goes above, depending on the criticality of your product. Bug prevention should be super important. If you can prevent a bug before it happens, obviously, that's the dollars, saved, and you don't spending time on, fixing those issues. Automation is going to be a key. And again, automation doesn't mean that you have to automate every single feature. You can automate the key part, or core part of your product, so that when you are releasing new features, that part doesn't need to be tested manually. It can be tested through these automated, scripts that we're using. And then, as I mentioned, that will help you to basically do the continuous integration, so that every time a code, new features is tested, it can be automatically deployed with automated tests running, and make sure nothing breaks. So you want the users who already have the product, it doesn't break in their hands. The shift left approach is interesting. The term we came up with, so shift left is basically don't test it after the product has been developed. So shift left is tested before, while it is being developed. So at the end of each sprint cycle, that's how you test the product to make sure, you have a good experience from the user perspective. And smart testing is, again, focus on core areas of the application, or where you think it will be most impact will happen. And that way you can really spend more time on there rather than the small issues, which may not be as much of a huge impact. And then again, similarly, the quality over quantity makes a difference, because you can have a lot of small bugs, which may not be blockers, or which may not be issues from a user or brand perspective. But the core areas, if even one issues, have a problem, that can have a huge impact on your brand and how you take it forward. So I hope these takeaways really help, and you can incorporate some of that as you're going across, building your products. I'm happy to answer any questions. I will stop my slide with that.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much, Gurvinder. Okay, so the first question that we have, when building on blockchain, what do you recommend in terms of platform update and launches? You speak of launching on time, making sure of a smooth transition. Is there a potential incentive that could be used?
Well, I think I'm not sure it's different for whether it's a blockchain or it's AI or it's just a regular healthcare app, with the HIPAA, with connecting with patients and their caregivers, or any kind of those situations. I think the QA testing and making sure that how you build that, CI/CD approach in terms of automating, testing every small features that has been changed or touched, so that you make sure that you do not break the application when it gets deployed on production. So I would say, like, every single feature, when you touch it, it's equally important to test it before you deploy.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. And the second question, for MVP development, what is the appropriate level of CNMI maturity? And what is Kiwitech's process in the maturity level?
So in my Batra days, I did get a lot of certifications, and I personally believe it's more of a certificate on the wall. That's I saw in Batra. And so we internally test ourselves at Kiwitech and where we are. And based on our own internal test, we are closer to CMMI 3 level. But having said that, I think it's the processes which really help. And for us, it was a really good test when we moved all of our 500 employees working at a single location to work from home, and we did not have any glitch. And that was, power of the processes we have built, and make it happen. But from an MVP perspective, I think MVP, the user may be a little bit more forgiving because you're really trying to test the waters. You may not have all the features built out, and you're really trying to kind of figure out, like, does this work? Does the user really interact with the app, or what I'm really trying to do? So there could be some more different scenarios that you have to keep in mind. But again, giving a MVP but having a buggy product, it can have a double impact. Like, it may be a very good solution that you're building, but because of it's buggy, you get bad user experience.
Okay, excellent. And everyone, please feel free to send questions, and then we can go from there. So we have another question. Do these practices apply to more mature companies or more lean startups?
I think they apply to both. If you adopt these QA processes early in the game, it really helps you to kind of, as you like, as I mentioned, for MVP, it may not be as critical, but as you take MVP to the next level, if you're not build these processes in your pipeline or how you're deploying product, then it becomes a catch up thing. Like especially if your product is taking off. And what happens in that case is you have a lot of technical debt that you have accumulated, which then over a period of time you have to see how do we take care of that. So I think it's good to have a start early. That's why I suggest, even when we start from a scratch with a startup, we say let's follow these processes, you get used to them, and then as you go forward, you can go into a more apply them more intensely like than you did in MVP stage.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much, Gurvinder. I think that's all the questions for now. If you
Great.
want to.
Thank you, Tyler.
Excellent.
And thank you, everyone.